Hi, everybody. It's Jack Cochran, General Manager of Presales Collective and your host for the Presales Podcast. Today's episode is a little bit different and a little bit special. This was recorded during our Leadership Next Summit back in November of 2025. For those of you who don't know, we hold 4 annual summits. So I suppose they're quarterly at that point. And leadership is our 4th quarter summit. And it's a lot of fun because we're talking about things related to being in leadership. If you're looking to move into leadership, and maybe it's for you because you just moved in and you have no idea what you're doing, that's exactly what this summit is for. In this session, I was talking with Gretchen Fitzgibbons, who is Senior Manager of Strategic Solutions Consulting at Airtable, talking all about the courageous leader and making tough calls under pressure. Fantastic conversation. Can't wait for you to hear it. But before I do, let me just say, we have, like I said, 4 of these. In 2026, we're focusing on AI, careers, and leadership again, like we always do. And SoulCon this year, which is going to be in Q3, is going to be about strategic impact. So check out our 3 virtual summits, as well as looking at SoulCon in August. I hope to see you there in Chicago. Let's get right to the episode. Today, I'm happy to have Gretchen Fitzgibbons, who is currently Senior Manager of Strategic Solutions Consulting at Airtable, here as my guest while we talk about the topic of the courageous leader and making tough calls under pressure. A little bit of an intro about Gretchen if you don't know who she is. She's got about 2 decades of experience advising Fortune 500 customers and connecting that technology to the non-technology people. I'm really excited to hear her take and share with you about being a courageous leader. So Gretchen, welcome to the Leadership Next Summit and the Presales Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm honored to be here. One of my favorite subjects, so I could talk about this all week.
Well, we don't have quite that much time, but we'll try to make the best of it. We will have a Q&A as well, just like our other sessions. So if you have things that you want to throw into the chat for us to walk through, you can do that. Ask Q&A as well. I want to kick us off with the topic of courageous leadership. I feel like that's got 2 things. It has courage and has leadership, something that I feel like there's so many definitions. So how would you define courage and leadership? And then I guess also, how would you define leadership as it relates to this?
I'll start with courage because I think courage has a lot of different definitions and it's definitely changed over my professional career. I would say how I look at courage now is being able to make the same consistent decisions and represent yourself the same way that aligns with your principles, no matter what the dynamics are, no matter how much pressure there is, how much urgency there is, and being able to make those decisions that you have to be able to really be comfortable that you're going to be uncomfortable in a lot of these situations. And you are making those decisions often when you're nervous or you have some fear about that, or you may be losing some social currency professionally because you're going against the grain, but you know that that's something integrity-wise really needs to be done and needs to be consistently represented. So it's doing that even when it's hard and even when it may not be favorable at that time. And as far as leadership goes, what's been a really interesting kind of definition of that for me is I used to think of it very much as title and tenure. And now I really look at leadership of presence, consistency, and the ability to get people to think bigger than themselves and being willing to be at the forefront when things aren't going well and be able to be in the back clapping when things are going well.
That can be anyone, right? To your point,
Yes.
That doesn't necessarily be the leader or the manager. That can be anyone on the team taking that role.
Exactly. And you're going to play those roles where you may be put in an influential position, even if you don't have the title to go with it. And I think sometimes that gets, who's going to listen to me? And there's a lot that you can do and you have more impact than you think you do, which has been a wonderful learning and unlearning as I've gone through my career.
Yeah, I love that. Just the thought of any of the times where you're in the position where you've had to either helping other people think bigger, whether it's good or small and good or bad times, really has, in my mind, set aside the leaders that I've had, whether that's been people I've reported to or people I've respected in my organizations, is probably the characteristic that's drawn me to them in my mind. The people who could effectively step into that space and be the person who can help calm the fears, calm the worries, or get everyone aligned to go in a direction together, even when it's tough.
Absolutely. I've been lucky to work with some amazing people over the years that were both someone I worked directly with, someone I worked in adjacent projects with, and somebody who just really brought their authentic self and were not uncompromising, but allowed other people in the room to be brave, which, that was someone I wanted to emulate that and had a chance to do that very fortunately in a lot of my roles.
I love it. The kind of subtitle of this session and episode is making tough calls under pressure. So obviously the setup of being a courageous leader and all the things that it talks about, I do want to focus on the difficult parts. Leadership isn't necessarily easy. It's definitely easier when things are going well. But when you have to make the tough calls, it can be much more difficult. Would love to hear from your experience, like a time or a story when you've had to make a tough call when you knew it was right for you and for your team, but not necessarily the most popular call. Would love to hear. I know you've got a story too to share about that.
Yeah, I have a couple. I think the one that immediately comes to mind was actually someone who wasn't directly on my team and was working with a colleague of mine, and both of them were really struggling to work together. And I had a chance because our organization, we did a really good job of making sure that we knew each other's team members, even if we weren't in the same segments. We really wanted to get to know them. We wanted them to get to know our teammates. And this individual was kind of getting written off unfairly as somebody who wasn't performing, even though watching gong calls, being there and seeing this person perform, she was doing great. And when it came to performance time and we were reviewing kind of who was going to be considered, underperforming, overperforming, mid-range, she was put in the low performing. And she wasn't on my team. I could have very easily said, not my circus, not my challenge. But just from a principal's perspective, I felt that she was being unfairly put in that position. And it was going to set a really bad precedent for us of it's about favoritism, not performance. And so tactfully, basically in this setting, brought in some examples of, hey, look, I've seen this. This is actually running counter to what I'm experiencing. I think we should maybe level set on if this is a fair and unbiased assessment. And it wasn't popular with my colleague at the time. And I had to accept that I wasn't going to make everybody happy. But I knew in principle that was something that I felt very strongly about and was able to triangulate with a couple of my other manager colleagues to back me up and then talk about, hey, while we're on this subject, it looks like there may be misalignments with segment, there may be misalignments with leadership styles. Let's find a forward together approach to get her into a better position while also not having headcount. So who could we also move who may be looking for a change to allow us to really have everyone winning while also addressing some of the challenges that got us to that point? Because it was nerve-wracking. I could have very easily, and in the past, I may have sat back and said, oh, it's not my problem. And she ended up actually moving into my team about 6 months later and was one of our best performers. But it was scary. And there was some tension with us following that conversation with that manager.
And I think in the situation too, no one would have blamed you for not doing anything because it's not your call. It's someone else who's got more direct. I can hear so many reasons why you should have just sat there and not stepped in. But that's the whole definition of courage as you had laid out. It has nothing to do with whether or not they were on your team. It's you saw something, you saw an opportunity that needed to be addressed, and you stepped in and did that. What was the risk that you felt you were up against by speaking up at that point?
I weighed that kind of going into it, and it was a surprise for us, but I had seen some indications that this was maybe happening. So I don't like to go into anything being emotions high. You're not going to do your best and you're going to misrepresent and actually make it worse. So I got some data, I looked at some calls, I'd sat in on some things and had some examples I could use. But I was fully prepared that if it didn't go well, or I was seen as meddling, or I needed to stay in my lane, that I had sort of preemptively to my boss said, hey, I'm noticing these patterns. I don't know if it's an indication that this is a trend. I want you to be aware that if this creates some tension, this is the intent behind it. And I don't want us to set a precedent that it's about who you curry favor with versus your performance, and that we will right size the organization to accommodate for people who are really quite excellent, but maybe put in the wrong spot. That was something I learned the hard way of telegraphing and having the trust of another, peer or manager that I could go to and say, hey, this is something I'm noticing. If this comes up, this is why I'm going to push for this. So that if it doesn't go well, you've got some things in a row. And maybe it's because my original leadership role was in a crisis PR company and PR firm. So you kind of get ready to prepare for message and have sponsorship backing when you are making tough decisions. So if it does blow up, you have a really good path to making sure yourself, your team, and fortunate or unfortunate, your reputation can flex with some of those things that may not be popular at the time.
So I feel like we could dissect almost all the steps you went through there. I mean, even from the start, like just removing the emotion from it, I think is very difficult for a lot of things to do, especially when you as a leader see something that you're like, this isn't right.
Oh, and it hit a nerve. I mean, trust me, I had to.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
there were some steps that were taken off camera that I was preparing for so that I didn't react, in a way that wasn't going to put the best foot forward for me or for this individual, because that was the last thing.
Taking those steps off camera is exactly the right move in that situation, though, right? And I think acknowledging that was a step that often, when you see a problem, you as a leader often want to act and go, and it's full of emotion. You're like, well, right now, I'm going to say the things I want to say. And if I wait, maybe I won't. Like, no, take the few moments to get your head straight. And the second piece was doing your research and your evidence to make sure, if I could extrapolate that a little bit, my assumption is making sure that what you were assuming was correct, right? Because you don't want to go in and defend someone and you do the research and find out, oh, actually, they have been underperforming.
Yeah. And that's on me. And you know what? I'd love to say I came to that, but it was one of those hands on the stove situations. Like, I'm grateful, as much as it was brutal at the time, I didn't do as much diligence in another setting with someone on my team, or I thought I had documented enough and I really hadn't been as clear as I needed to be. And I hadn't dug in early enough when I saw indicators. I was like, oh, they've got a lot of stuff going on. They're new. They'll work it out, giving a little more, almost too much autonomy, because I'm very cognizant of the last thing I want to be is a micromanager, especially if I've been an individual, I've been an SC, I've been in their position. I don't want to try to create a bunch of mini me's. I want someone better. And I had to kind of look in the mirror and say, you didn't do the work. You didn't communicate clearly enough. You didn't communicate when you started to notice some cracks. And now it's become an issue, and that's on you. And so if you're going to really try to make a decisive change, you're not at the right space to do that. And you have to own that you didn't approach it correctly. You were telling stories that they're doing fine, and you weren't looking at the information. So I tried to learn those instead of having to repeat as much as I can,
I guess that's the hardest part, is especially anyone here who's listening, who's thinking, hey, maybe I'd want to move from being an SC into being a manager. It's a tough leadership role because you suddenly have to have all your focus on everybody else. And it's no longer on the stuff that you're doing, but on what everyone else is doing. And the phrase that you said, Gretchen, is the right approach, that not everyone's here for that. You wanted to make everyone better than you, which the leaders who have moved into a management role, who have done well, have all had that approach, that attitude. It's one, taking the focus off yourself, and two, wanting to make other people better than you are, versus just, I want you all to demo the way I do because the way I do it's the best, right? That's not quite the right approach to it.
Yeah.
You'll still obviously make the mistakes, but that's the right mentality, especially when you're thinking, okay, I want to make someone better than I was at it. I need to focus on them. I need to invest the time to understand where they're actually at, to give them the right feedback so that they can get better. It's suddenly, if you're thinking about it and going, you're managing a team of 4 or 8 or 10 people, suddenly you realize why your manager was so busy all that time if they were good.
You're like, what do they even do? I would have that, I had really good ones where I was like, I know what you're doing. I think that gets into part of being courageous is also being honest and being transparent. So that was something I learned. And I always appreciated working for people that were really transparent with me. They didn't baby me. They didn't coddle, they didn't overshare to make me terrified of what was, the inner workings. But they were really good about being, hey, I'm asking you to do this, and I'm noticing these things. And this ties to a bigger challenge we're seeing. And that's why I'm asking you to do that. I think when you're a courageous leader, you're saying, I don't know. I mean, getting used to, as this joke that I'm clear as kind, that I love that. There's somebody in the chat, Steve Wellington. I love that. Clear as kind is, I actually have a Post-it note on my monitor that says clear as kind, because there's so much that you can work from if you're just clear about expectations, or say, hey, I wasn't clear on that. That's on me. Here's how I'm going to improve that. And, using that as then, here's some things that I would love to see the same from you. And use that as almost a give-get in a setting where both of your hackles are down. The emotions aren't as extreme. And I think when you're working, especially we're working in the tech space, everything is urgent. I needed everything yesterday. And that sense of false urgency can start to make you think that you have to make decisions right as you get something coming through. That was something that I learned when I was first managing a team. I was so busy trying to get to inbox 0 and I got to fix everything that I wasn't taking a step back to say, okay, what do I actually know? What do I not know? And what if my assumption is actually the opposite? And so you're going from that thinking fast and slow. Like if you're going too quick, you're going to make a much more emotional decision. And don't get me wrong, I think emotions are, and passion are really important when you're a leader, because there's going to be times where it's hard and you need to show that it's hard. Because people don't need you to be this sort of flat, cardboard leader. They need to know that that is something that you're feeling too, so that they can have permission to have those feelings, but also where you need to curb that, go for a walk, close your laptop. Right. I mean, for me, if I get it out of my head, especially if it's something that's a really tough, almost unwinnable situation, but needs to be addressed, that's something that if I write it down and then I talk through it with people who aren't close to it, it just allows me to percolate, and then I can come with a much more informed response.
I definitely agree with you there. I think if I was to put into words, I'd say you want to be making your decisions with logic, but communicating with that passion and that emotion, right? Versus the other way around. I feel like we spend too much time deciding things emotionally and then finding the most logical way to communicate it. It's like, this is the wrong way around. If you've got that tough decision, taking the time, writing it down, whatever you have to do, so that you know you're making the right decision, doing the research that you need to do, and then saying, okay, now let's put the emotion back into it. How do I get people excited about this decision? Or how do I, if it's not a good one, this gets back to the transparency bit that I actually want to dig into a little bit more. When it's a tough, something you have to communicate that's not good news, how do you have the right level of emotion that might not be exciting, but you need to have that empathy built into it? On that note, around the transparency, when it is tough calls like that, how do you know how to communicate that and how much to communicate it? Because not all the times as leaders can we share everything we've been given information about. There's some things that our leaders have told us, here's something that's not ready to distribute to the whole team, but something you should know. How do you communicate what you can't communicate? How can you be as transparent as possible when you're told not to be fully transparent?
I've overshared earlier in my career, and I actually think it was more detrimental than if I had erred on the side of here's what I know. And, here's what we're doing in place to make sure that you're in a good place. We had that, we were going through some cost cutting measures with my team, and my team was performing, but we had, some indications that things were slowing down. And I got information that we were probably going to have to do a RIF, and we weren't allowed to say anything. It's going into the fall, and it's every manager's worst nightmare, because you're not only can I not give you the merit you've earned, right, but now I have to figure out, you're in sort of CYA mode if you're not careful of, I got to protect my team and I got to make sure everything's in place. And so what I had done with and maybe it's because I started my job in 2007 when like the bottom fell out in 2008. And so I witnessed what that looked like, that I always kind of, the best prep is having business cases for the value of your team, the impact of your team, the metrics that are irrefutable of what your team's doing, so that you can really focusing their attention on those things that are going to matter. That made a huge difference. And so with my team, I said, hey, look, there's going to be some challenges coming up. What I want you all to focus on is, pipeline, being there for your sales reps, really driving home these big deals and going through those metrics. You let me worry about how we navigate that. But I can tell you what I'm doing on a weekly, daily basis is advocating for the value of our team, advocating for where we make an impact to the business, and making sure all of your names are ubiquitous with value. And that was something that, no matter what happens, you've put everything you can without traumatizing your team about what's coming, which was at least helpful. And I've had leaders who did that for me. They're like, look, I can't tell you where this is going to end up, but I'll tell you the advocacy and marketing I'm doing on my side to put you in the best position possible.
I love that. And there's nothing wrong with saying there are things that I can't tell you, right?
Yeah. I had to get used to that. I was like, that is not a failing. That is showing resilience there.
Because there is that temptation, I felt it many times where I'm like, oh, can I just in confidence tell you something? If you promise not to say anything, you got to act surprised. That never works. Well, that never works. That can work, but it also can really come back to bite you. And if the message changes, now you're like, okay, now I have to keep you updated on all the things I'm not supposed to be continuing to tell you.
Right.
Better to
good
say,
intentions.
Yes, good intentions, but all of a sudden now you're stuck over communicating. You can't stop over communicating once you've started over communicating as well.
Oh, yeah.
So being able to be honest, which I believe is actually a better courageous perspective, is to say, hey, I know we're all a team. I've got your backs. There are things I can't tell you, but here's what I can tell you. It goes a long way, especially if you are honest with them, that you'll tell them, you'll be upfront with them with anything once you can be.
Yeah. And that was really helpful to saying less. I actually had a rep that he initially, when he and I worked together before I was the leader, I thought he was very sort of stoic and difficult to get to know. And then as I got to kind of learn from him, he goes, if yes, period, will suffice, that's enough. And it was really helpful as somebody who really likes to give a lot of context. Sometimes I was saying less and just hearing people out. I think, again, with my team, it's like, look, I can sense that, knowing them all in my one-to-ones, knowing them going to on-sites, my team was all 100% remote and is now as well. And the hard part when you're building teams like that is like, here, they're just a little screen. And building that trust and authentic trust can be really hard, and getting to know the nuances of how they work. But it was really helpful to say, hey, I've noticed you seem a little more stressed. Is there something that you're concerned about? Let me know where I can help, and I'll provide as much clarity as I'm able. And the amount of times of giving that space, or, knowing there are certain people who won't speak up, but they'll speak through another peer, and figure out who that influential peer is. Back to the leaders can be agnostic of title. When I started figuring out, who are the glue employees, they may not be your top peak performer, but they are the canary in the coal mine for sentiment, for areas of concern, for trends, and them saying something to the wider team can have so much more impact than if it's coming from you.
There's always someone who has always got the pulse. I can think of very specific people that I've led in the past, and actually people I've been even when I was an individual contributor, people who I'm like, oh, that was the person on our team who always was like, everyone would go to them and talk to them. And so the wise leader is going, hey, so what's the sentiment of the team? How's everyone feeling? Right.
Yeah. Without mining for that. Because I think what you don't want to do is you don't want to also turn them into like sort of the patsy for especially if you're not agreeing. Sometimes you're going to not agree with that, what's being done. But there's an element of like, I can't be on every hill fighting every battle, and just knowing when to back off and when to really go after certain things that you don't agree with. And then not making them, sort of, they're losing their social credibility because they're almost being the mouthpiece of these things, which I'm always very cognizant of.
So for people who are sitting here today, who are here because they're wanting to move into some type of a leadership role, whether that be a management role, whether that be some other type of strategic leadership role within their organizations, obviously there's a little bit different when you've not been given that leadership position yet. But how can you work on practicing and preparing for courageous leadership and practicing courage in your day-to-day work when you're not there yet?
I would start with what you're about. So what are your principles? Really grounding yourself in what are the things that I really see as important and have made me somebody who can be a good advocate for other people. That could be that you're transparent, you're accountable, you're reliable, and that those are true to you. So you have that kind of internal locus of control. The second one is have a really good peer group in different areas outside of your specific department, because they're not only going to give you perspective on what resonates, but they're going to give you other ways to triangulate and have more influence, whether it's with a title, it's being involved in projects, it's being able to speak up and be supported. I cannot tell you how much cross-departmental collaboration and friendships have meant and have made me a better leader and allowed me to help lead leaders because they have that kind of connection outside of just their realm of pre-sales. The third is, I call it kind of having your board of directors. They can be friends, they can be mentors, especially those that are outside of your sphere. They're going to give you really good direction. They're going to give you connections, and they're also going to help you to stress test what you really want and where your passions are and what's something that's going to really help you to benefit yourself and others. And so as you can tell, a lot of those are around people. It's yourself, it's your direct organizational kind of impact, and then it's outside of your realm to get those different senses of perspective. And that will keep you honest and will also open your eyes to maybe even roles or projects that can help catapult you into that level of influence that you would never have thought of if you didn't engage them.
Yeah. The cross-departmental thing as well. I think about every leadership interview I've had for a leadership role, they've wanted to know how well you've done connecting with cross-departmental, because that's a big part of any leadership role, strategic role, management, doesn't matter. You have to be good with working with others in your organization, not just your immediate team. So there's no reason why you can't start that now. I agree with Clifford. A great way to put it, your own board of directors, having mentors inside and outside of your company, very important as well. It kind of gets back to what we were talking about before. It's part of that evaluation process of any decision that you're making. Start practicing that now, right? Start relying on others, getting feedback from others, and doing that research. So you're making that logic-based decision.
And you can remain curious too. I mean, I think what's a core tenet of any of this that also allows you to be curious about the other person's perspective, even if you don't agree, even if you're having to make a decision that you know might not resonate, you're going, why is it that this is their response? I wonder if, we had talked to them, or if we weren't both remote and we were on site, maybe, we're having trouble communicating and they're having trouble connecting because they don't know each other. I've done that where I've had to admit, like, hey, I put this person in a box they didn't belong in. And I met them in person and I went, you make a ton of sense. We had a sales rep who had a reputation, for example, for being an absolute bulldozer. And he had been sort of written off by her entire SC organization as like, will not work with him. I'd rather quit. Then he had moved into my segment. I'd never worked with the guy before. And I asked, I was like, has anybody ever given him honest feedback that this is how he's perceived? Like, just curious. And if so, like, send it over. Because I know I wouldn't want to come into something without knowing that I'm seen as, nightmare fuel. And then I'm responding to the negative feedback I'm getting. Maybe it's because I'm an aging millennial, but I'm a big phone person. So I was like, you know what? I'm just going to call him. So I called him and I said, hey, I know you're coming out of the team. I wanted you to be aware of some perceptions about what you like to work with. And I'll tell you how I like to work. I like to see partnership. I like to see clarity, and I like to see mutual respect. And I think we can get there. But I was like, but what I want you to know is that I have a couple of SCs who, knowing you're coming to this team, are very concerned. And I want to know, has anyone ever talked to you about that? Because here are some specifics. Whether he knew that and was playing dumb, or he genuinely seemed to be like, I just kept being told they were just, shifting alignments around. I didn't know that. And I was like, okay, well, here's some things I want to work on. Have an agenda. Let the person know before Monday morning at 9 a.m. that they have a meeting. Those kind of small things. And then really worked with him and his first line leader. And it was night and day. I just went from a place of curiosity of like, has anybody really actually said anything to him? And then if he acts like a booger, then you can deal with it. But, giving somebody the benefit of the doubt, sometimes it doesn't work out, but I still think it's worth the risk because, at least in my career, some of our best advocates started out being somebody that nobody wanted to work with.
Yeah. That curiosity is something, again, anyone can practice, and it's very valuable. I think it's so easy for us, especially in a situation like that. I could say it'd be very easy to be like, oh yeah, they are the problem person. But I think it takes a courageous leader to say, is it that way? Or I wonder if that's actually the situation, and reevaluating it. So I think that's 100% something that now I'm not sitting here going, what are the things I'm not being as curious about that I should be? So you're making me like sit here try to think. So I know that's something I'm going to be doing as a takeaway of this, is trying to write down what are the things I'm not being curious enough about, especially as it relates to people.
And being okay being wrong.
Yeah.
One of the things that I love is that we have a CRO where I am now, where he got up in front of all of his leaders cross-departmentally, and he goes, I'm going to be radically accountable. And he goes, I got this one deal and I thought they were sandbagging, and I didn't ask any questions. I made a lot of assumptions, and I started going down this whole other story path. And I took a step back and went, hold on, what is this based off of? And for him, like, I work places where somebody would rather die than admit they ever made a mistake. To have a CRO go up in front of their entire organization and admit that they were wrong gave all of us permission to make mistakes, but hold ourselves accountable to be better. And I've never seen that. I mean, that's a big reason why I love where I am, is this isn't somebody who talks about being courageous, talks about being accountable. It's action to match the words. I mean, I'll run through walls for this guy because of that. So shout out to Paul Oles. And I think that's courageous and on stage. So, it's pretty powerful stuff.
Absolutely. And I'm sure there's potentially some people here who are, anyone listening along, who's like, hey, I got a question you want to throw about courageous leadership, making tough calls, about curiosity, about being transparent, about being vulnerable, any of the things we've been talking about. There's a Q&A feature to ask your question. But I'm seeing good stuff coming through on the chat. Appreciate Steve recommending Adam Grant's book, Think Again. That's actually on my to-read list. So another reason why I bumped that one up. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, Gretchen.
I'm not. We talked about, as we were prepping for this, I am a huge bookworm, and I will read anything and everything under the sun. In fact, I have like a couple right here, but that's one I haven't heard. But I love Adam Grant. I love hearing like who else he's influenced by and how eager he is to share moments that are surprising to him. I think that that's always really cool. You're going to get more book ideas and more concept from him. There was also, I think Chad had put in something in the chat about connecting with cross-functional teams and peers, and love to hear that they're doing cross-functional leader cohorts for leadership related topics. I love that it doesn't have to be an OKR, a transformation program to establish that. It's almost like, a council of best practice as leaders. I think that's a great idea. I'm a magpie of good ideas, so I love kind of stitching together different examples.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially as pre-sales leaders, too much in our own silo of either just ourselves or maybe the sales leaders who we work with directly. But rarely do I see that going beyond other leaders in the organization for thinking about leadership topics, discussing ideas. I mean, there's a lot of transferable ideas that we tend to ignore.
Yeah, Ilya's I was just looking at too.
Yeah. Ilya's got a question here. What are good ways to practice leadership or find places to be a leader? It's a great question.
I think even if you're not somebody who, let's say, has direct reports, I found a ton of both, I think, personal passion and fulfillment in mentoring. I think peer-to-peer mentoring can be an amazing place to practice leadership. Coaching, coaching kids sports or doing something along those lines can also be a wonderful way to step outside of, if you're in the same room, in the same setting all the time, you can get very stuck in the way of thinking about being a leader. And that can happen every single day. And it forces you to kind of go back to the basics, which can be a really great place and foundation to start from. And I think getting involved, with mentoring peers in different parts of your organization continent-wise. So I found I learned a ton and really stepped outside of my understanding by working with our EMEA team or our APJ team, where each of us could cross-pollinate things that we never would have thought of, and change the way that I would even advise my team on how to work with, a global organization out of Switzerland or selling to a team in Australia. That allows you to also take some of those examples and what they've found to be successful that you would never explore otherwise. Plus, now you have somebody you can call up and share some new ideas, which is always a great way to connect.
Steve's got another take on it. Steve Bullington was saying volunteering on a nonprofit board is a great way to develop your leadership skills. Also, good practical ways you can look at outside of your job, outside of your workplace. A lot of good things like that. Do love that. Joe Morse asked a question in the Q&A saying, how do you distinguish between performative vulnerability and genuine vulnerability in leadership? I suspect that's hard to get right. So if I'm understanding Joe's question, how do you, when you see someone like your CRO who's being vulnerable and transparent, how do you distinguish whether that's performance to get a result versus genuine?
I mean, some people are really good at faking it. What I would say is, a lot of getting to know those people. I like doing what I call the Slack test. So when somebody starts at a new company, I'll send them a Slack and be like, hey, welcome. Loved seeing some of your background. And it's very interesting if they respond or not. Because if you're an authentic leader, they're busy. But all the ones that I've worked for, including, this gentleman that I work with now, he got back to me right away and was like, hey, great to hear from you. And I had other ones, couldn't have been less interested, but they were very performatively engaged. And it seems like a small thing, but just the little Slack test or the, hey, great to meet you, or really loved seeing your, this win that you had, radio static. And then they'll reach out to you when they need something. Those are great indicators of authenticity versus performative engagement. I've used that in a couple different places, and it's been, not that it's foolproof, but it's been really insightful.
It's an indicator, right? It's stuff you can do to kind of test. Is this person just using me as a resource and trying to beef me up as a resource and make me feel important when it's required, or do they genuinely care about the well-being of the team? Seeing a couple other things here in chat. Ilya has a hot take. Video games with friends has been helpful in learning how to manage, talk, and implement strategy in real time. As someone who plays video games a lot, I can say, I can see that. I think you learn how to deal with toxic people as well sometimes, depending on the game that you're in as well. So working with people in sometimes a not overtly friendly environment, that could also be a good one.
I like subtle no's. I think you learn a lot, with everybody's really friendly and cooperative until they get, a subtle no. So I would try with a couple of, second line, first line, not to be a pickle, but just, if I was seeing some behaviors that I wasn't certain about, I would say, I know you needed us on site. I'm not sure if that's going to work this week, but let's talk about options. And if they immediately go to anger or they're frustrated, it's just fodder to understand, okay, they're great to work with and partner with until you don't do what they want. And that can be just good indicators of, you can still be friendly and professional with them, but they're not going to be someone who's going to advocate for you. Or they're going to be someone that you'll have to do a lot of background politicking in case something doesn't go well, because they're usually the first ones to escalate. And those have been really interesting things I learned from a couple of mentors of mine, that they're like, assume good intent, but prepare in case not.
Right. That's the right approach. 'Cause the last thing you want to do is go in assuming that it's bad unless proven otherwise. Like you want to go in, assume that best intent, and actually test it out. Right. I think that's something that we talked before about people reacting with emotions. I've had a lot of people that have been leaders in the past, the people that I've worked for, when I've come in, they're like, oh, they're a terrible person. And it's very easy to just believe, oh, they're a bad leader. I don't know why they're in that position.
Yeah.
They must have someone's ear behind, politicking behind the scenes to get that job. But really, did you do your own investigation? And there was one person where I remember being told they're not a good person. And I'm like, no, actually, they're a good person. I don't know what they did to piss off a couple of people, but like the rumor spread poorly, but there's nothing bad about this person. I've enjoyed it, and it was able to kind of take it from that. But that curiosity we get back to again, that kind of continually comes back as something you need to focus on.
Because it allows you to just be, kids are curious. That's why, like a lot of times they'll get along with a lot of people and they're very clear. And, like my own kids sometimes they teach me more than I teach them. And, so when I walk out this door from my home office and I'm greeted with them, I mean, I learn more from how they navigate things together with dignity and integrity. And as long as you can keep that childlike, playful curiosity, it can allow you to really ensure you're not falling into those biases and that you're staying open-minded, because leaders can be impacted by someone who you're not expecting. It's a great way to continue to expand that sphere of creativity and transparency, even when you're under pressure.
Right. I love that. Before we end, I like coming back and asking, I guess, two things. The first of which is very simply, if someone wants to get a hold of you, talk to you more, maybe they're interested in hearing more about some of the things that you brought up, how can someone get a hold of you?
You can contact me on LinkedIn. I check DMs and I love connecting with interesting people. So I've made a lot of connections that way. That's probably the easiest way to reach me. Usually from there, I'll join a conversation, share ideas. And I've even had with some sessions that I've done here where people who are right up the street from me, who we've been able to meet up. So that's usually one of the best ways to connect. And also, if you have books that build on this, or, like the nonprofit board ideas, I'd love to hear them. And so, just seeing, like Brooks and Clifford and Chad and Ilya and some of the other folks who are engaging, same here. I'd love to connect the other way, because there's always more ideas to share.
Right. And you mentioned it briefly, you get through lots of books, you love reading, always have one on the side. So send book recommendations, I think, was one thing.
Yes.
So along with that connection, maybe say hi. And if you haven't read this book, read this book.
Book that I keep going back to.
Yes. After we get through Think Again on the book list. The last question that I have is, what's something that you feel like we didn't cover that you wanted to talk about, or something that would be your top takeaway for someone if they're just catching the very end here?
I would say one thing we didn't talk about to kind of ground this, besides, if anyone missed earlier, of the importance of people and the people around you, both your board of directors, of friends, family, coaches. The other thing is helpful frameworks. It doesn't mean you get really rigid with them, but I've had a few that I continue to come back to. I forget who brought it up earlier, but kind is clear. Even just little Post-its you have for yourself that are grounding principles. For me, something that's served me really well over the years is the 10-10-10 principle, which is think about when you're making a decision, how will you feel about that decision you're making in 10 minutes, in 10 months, in 10 years? And it's amazing, and write it down. Because for me, if I let it kick around in my head, it becomes this monstrous, impossible decision. And when I talk it out and I write it down and then I leave it and come back to it, there are things about my own thoughts and my own assumptions that suddenly jump off the page or get called out by someone who doesn't know anything about the dynamics I'm dealing with. That principle, writing and journaling. And when you're feeling heated, if you can, get a walk, get out, move your body. It's amazing how much clarity there is in just getting outside of those four walls, whether you're in an office setting or you're in a home office. It's amazing how much change of scenery can allow your reticular activating system to pick up on things you might be ignoring.
I forget who had said it, but someone was saying that time when you get out, you go for a walk, you get exercise, you just change your dynamic. It's what helps you to finally process all the input you've been taking. And especially things that are big, the things that you've got to make a decision on, that you're going through maybe the 10-10-10 process. If you don't give your brain time without additional inputs to process that information, you're never going to be able to actually come to a good conclusion on it. So 100% agree with all of that, and have absolutely enjoyed it. Gretchen, thank you so much for joining us here on Leadership Next 2025, as well as the special edition of the Presales podcast. I look forward to chatting with you again soon at some point and swapping book recommendations. So thanks so much for being on the show.
Really appreciate it. And I saw Thinking Fast and Slow, which is on my bookshelf. Absolutely. It's been such a great experience. And, already I have 2 books that I'm going to either pull off the shelf or quickly put into my cart after this. So really amazing work and love to be a part of it.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Presales podcast by Presales Collective. Did you know that we also post on the Presales Collective blog following each episode? Head there to read through information on shows you might have missed or find another past episode to listen to. For more information on the Presales podcast itself and to listen to those past episodes, visit presalescollective.com/podcast.